don't particularly want to engage in looking at the dark web. So we actually built a system called Dark Search Engine, which monitors the dark web 24/7, 7 days a week, and updates every 4 hours. So, and our reason for that was that we know that when there are data breaches, that it can take a long time before a company is aware that they've had a data breach. But if they're aware that their emails are suddenly being sold on the dark web within about 4 hours, then that alerts them quickly to the fact that they may have an issue. So for us, really, we're trying to encourage SMEs, businesses in general, to not see due diligence as something that you do immediately you want to do business with someone and to do it in that moment in time. That it's an ongoing relationship, and therefore the monitoring and alerting should be an ongoing process. We think that's incredibly important.
Okay,
and just to say, during that process of building the dark web platform, we did some work with with CIFAS on online fraud, and I've put out for everybody to look at the CIFAS report, so that they can look at the exposure that directors have through their online activity.
Excellent. Well, we'll come back to fraud, and there's a particular point that you mentioned that I'd like to come back to in the Q&A later, which is that you said that within 4 hours, information can be sold within on the dark web if there's a breach. But if you can hold that thought, we'll come back to that in the Q&A later in terms of how the information, when there's been a breach, makes its way out across the market, and then what an organisation needs to do as a consequence. But I'm going to get the UK government's view now, and Simon, you operate within the Department of International Trade and aware of the government more widely in terms of the work they do on internationally. Now, you've worked closely with businesses, and particularly those seeking to grow their presence in the Middle East. What kind of support, when organisations are moving into new jurisdictions, can DIT and the government more generally give to companies that are trying to export more services? You're on mute at the moment, Simon.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Keith. That's great. So yes, I work out of the British Embassy in Dubai, and my role with the Department for International Trade is to help UK cyber businesses export. So I think on the I might just start and finish my comments with the wider HMG points and put the DIT bit in the middle. So for wider HMG, I think I'll pick up on a point that Oliver made really well about the National Cybersecurity Centre. You know, it's essential that the government enables British business to be cyber secure themselves and to have really good standards of their own cyber protection, which allows them to kind of conduct their business effectively, and then when they get put into supply chains, be reassured. So things like the Cyber Essentials certification that NCSC has, you know, it's really important for businesses to look at. But actually, the role of government there is really about the kind of culture that you set around the issue. And one of the things that we've done really well in the UK, I think, as a community, is try to create a culture of kind of guidance and sharing, and the fact that we're in it together. We can cooperate, collaborate, share information. And we've tended to avoid a sort of structure of fines and regulation and finger pointing. And so, you know, the first thing about what wider government can do is really about creating a culture of cooperation rather than a culture of sort of over-regulation. And that's particularly around the NCSC. So what does DIT do? What does the Department for International Trade do? Well, as a department, we're a mixture of staff at home in the UK, regionally based as well, and also at posts overseas. And, you know, effectively our job is to try and make market introductions and give market advice to companies that think they have a chance of exporting and products overseas. So typically the kind of help we give is a mixture of some advice from our UK-based staff, who then put companies who want to export in touch with the regional markets. So just a few ideas about the kind of practical things that as DIT we can and can't do. So we can give kind of general market advice. We can tell you how kind of your product might go down in a particular marketplace. We can make some connections for you. Particularly, we can give you a bit of advice about companies that might help you set up, have a kind of establishment there, help you contract. We can give you a bit of advice about potential partners. Local companies that have maybe got good market access. We're always, as an embassy or as a government, happy to speak up in favour of UK companies that are doing particular bids. We're always happy to get behind UK firms. It's always a bit easier for us if there's only one UK firm bidding on those things. But we have ways of kind of generally steering our end users around. And the kind of model that we have is that as a British government, we still get really good access into end users for kind of strategic level conversations about policy. And our job in DIT, my job in particular, is to turn those sort of strategic conversations into opportunities for business. So a few things about the things that we kind of can't really do. We can't do kind of formal legal due diligence for companies. We're no substitute for kind of proper legal research. The other thing that we can't do is it's difficult for us sometimes to make direct introductions for every company to every end user. Imagine if we're in the UAE and we're dealing with the Ministry of Interior, we have a lot of different things to speak to them about, and we have to kind of use our political capital quite carefully. So we can help make introductions to kind of resellers and local partners, but sometimes it's quite difficult for us to make one-on-one direct introductions. And just lastly, we can't kind of give you advice on contract negotiations, but those are the legal things that you can find in market. One of the problems that we tend to find, or one of the challenges, particularly for SMEs, is trying to find the companies that are really export ready. It's a kind of mixture of some of the companies have got really fantastic cutting edge technology. We want to hear from those, but we find it easier to help ones that have done a bit of basic market research and they're not just plucking a country kind of out of the blue. The companies have to do a bit of legwork. So that's about DIT. And just to close, just on kind of wider government support again, because again, I think this is quite important to kind of recognise the things that we do well as a community in the UK, industry and government in partnership. In actual fact, I'm actually on secondment from industry myself. So we have interchange between government and industry, which kind of gets both sides familiar with each other's priorities. But one of the things that we've done, regionally quite successfully is build up a cyber ecosystem. Not a great term, but I think it's kind of pretty descriptive. One of the things that you find, is that when you start worrying about the kind of skills that you have both in government and in industry for cybersecurity, it's almost 5 years too late. You should have been worrying about those kind of that skills and capabilities pathway that came through. And so things that we do in things like the National Cybersecurity Centre for accrediting university degrees, that's really, really important. So, in the Birmingham area, both University of Birmingham and Warwick have got Masters in Cybersecurity accredited by the NCSC. Not too far away from Cheltenham as well with cyber accelerators. So I think my closing comment is that, for government, it's also just about creating a wide ecosystem and a wide network of kind of contacts and capabilities that give us the kind of skills and people that we need to both make our own companies efficient and to export successfully. So with that, I'll close. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. I'll come back in the Q&A on a couple of points that you've mentioned, but Deborah earlier mentioned about data breaches and the human element. So I'm going to turn the next question to Flavius, one of our panelists, who, amongst other things, Flavius, your business examines risk from a human perspective. Now, according to the Information Commissioner's Office most recent report, 90% of data breaches are caused by employees. So that could be cloud misuse through unauthorized access or data left in insecure locations, and that's a major problem. How should SMEs that are looking to establish themselves in new jurisdictions, how should those companies address that issue? And do you feel that the technology itself is sufficient to secure the cloud?
Hey, thank you very much, Keith. That is a big question. I'll try to keep it brief, though. So indeed, data breaches caused by employees, according to the UK Information Commissioner's Office, is the #1 cause of data breaches. And so when it comes to the cloud, organizations have been trying to take control of the cloud environment by using Cloud Access Security Broker, or CASB, solutions. These are great because they provide rich visibility, control over data travel, and sophisticated analytics to identify a wide range of cybersecurity threats, including things such as which of our employees are using personal cloud storage for corporate sensitive information. And at this point, organizations will be trying to deal with the problem by delivering security awareness training to their employees. There's great resources out there. Even the National Cybersecurity Center, just go to their website. There's really a lot of materials you can use at that point. But still, as an industry, we're delivering more security awareness training than ever before. And the numbers aren't changing. The 90.7% we're hearing of from the ICO now, a couple of years ago, was 90.5%. So very, very similar, despite all of this training. And the reason for that is because we still don't understand the why. Why are people doing it? And this is something CASB cannot provide. So when we talk about managing human risk, it's really important to understand not just what people are doing and why they might be doing it, but also really understand why. Why are they doing it? It's easy to assume and believe that they're doing it because they don't know any better and therefore they need some training. But in reality, people do it for a variety of reasons. Perhaps sometimes they're really disengaged. They never actually intended to comply with the cloud or security policy of the organization in the first place. Some of these guys might be reckless or shadow agents indeed, right? So it is the key is to really understand, measure, and with that understanding and that measurement, really seek to affect people's sentiment, their attitudes, and their perception, because that's what fundamentally drives behaviors. And so, like with CASB, automated, sophisticated analytics are available to identify and measure human risk. This is what my company provides. I'm thinking now, our clients are all large enterprises, and they really need this. When it comes to the SMEs, even if they would have those analytics in front of them, answering the why of human risk, what would they be able to do with it? Not much. So I would say for SMEs, automation becomes even more important. So visibility plus automation. That's my message for the SMEs. And of course, CASB remains a good idea.
Right, but you stand by the technology and that it is sufficient to secure the cloud.
Well, sufficient. I wouldn't really use that word. I would say, cybersecurity, people, process, technology, and we're seeing organizations look at it more holistically. They're going beyond just technical security measures to actually do some of the things I've mentioned before. We're seeing more of a focus on people. And of course, this is very encouraging because we're transforming cybersecurity. Historically, and I've been doing cybersecurity for 18 years in various organizations, including financial services and banks. Historically, there's been a lot of reliance on technology, and we've been hoping that technical security measures will actually make it all okay. But as the ICO is showing, that's far from the truth. So yes, I think more of a focus on people is needed, and this is what we're seeing out there in the industry as well.
Okay, so let's extend that question. Ian Glover, you're the CEO of an organization that represents the whole technical information security industry. So you're busy shaping best practice across industries. Do you see cloud as a security problem, or do you see it as a solution? And then how can businesses such as the SMEs that are in our audience today provide the necessary technical assurances?
I think that's a really good question. From my perspective, I think that the governments and some of the larger organisations have viewed cloud as a security-related problem for quite some time, and that's how they've described it, and not necessarily as part of a big solution. But obviously, the convenience, the cost, the lack of the requirements to run the infrastructure yourself, all of those sorts of things have driven more and more organisations, including government, to look more strategically at how they would implement cloud services. I think the big problem is that governments and large enterprise can in some ways influence some of the cloud providers, but the SMEs can make no influence at all. So the difficulty is you sort of get what you've bought, with very little understanding of both the costs and the type of security that's provided. And my strong belief is that what we should be doing is to understand what good looks like in terms of cloud provision from a security perspective, and then to really understand the level of exposure and therefore the level of cost associated with the organisations that are buying those services. I think from the penetration testing community, which is one of the areas that we represent, it's been very difficult because a lot of the cloud service providers, the big ones, don't want their services penetration tested. And I can fully understand that, not because they've got anything to hide, but they have hundreds or thousands of clients that are using those services. And if they have to do a penetration test for each one of those, the attack profile will just be huge. So I think what we need to do is to find some way of doing it once and then coming out with sort of a class act. So we can describe that if you're running parts of the critical national infrastructure, you need this type of cloud service. But if you're running a low-risk organisation, then this level would be appropriate. I think the difficulty comes with some of the other conversations that have happened. Supply chain is really interesting. So if you're a supplier to a major organisation, then the way that I would attack that major organisation is through the supply chain, and certainly that's the approach that we see. And therefore, it could be that the fact that just because you're a relatively low risk or a small organisation, in actual fact, you have to buy more expensive services with a higher level of assurance in terms of what's being provided by the cloud service provider. I think that becomes difficult. So some form of triage in there to make sure that we understand what type of risk that you're exposed to, but if you form part of the supply chain for a larger organisation, what it is they're going to ask for, I think is invaluable. So therefore, the first thing is how does an SME select and find something that's suitable for their purposes at a cost they can afford. They also need to be able to demonstrate even what good looks like to their people that work within their buying community. So in other words, to demonstrate that the processes they have in place, particularly in areas like cloud, but in all areas, their security are actually fit for purpose. And then I also think they need to demonstrate how they would fit in with the escalation process. And again, one of the things I think that some of the cloud service providers don't do very well is actually escalate to all of its community. So if it experiences a problem, generally it's fixed really quickly, which is one of the huge benefits. But the way it communicates with some of the suppliers, with some of its customers, I think could be improved. I also think finally that the tech element is really important. I completely agree with what Flavia says in terms of the human risk element. But I think what we're seeing is more and more sophistication. We're now seeing the sort of advent of mass whaling rather than mass phishing. So in other words, really targeted attack. And I think what we need to do is we need to put more technology in there to help people. I think it used to be the case that it was naive and stupid people that was subject to this type of attack. But as it gets more and more sophisticated, I think we all run the risk of clicking on something that was inappropriate. And therefore, if we don't have double checks from a technology perspective in place, then I think we could run into problems.
Yeah, excellent point. Well, let's ask my last question to somebody who's been looking at all of those issues in the real world setting of the Bank of England. And Don Randall, as the former Chief Information Security Officer and Chief Security Officer for the Bank of England, how do you maximize all these various sources of information, of data, of technologies to protect organizations from cyber risk? How do you combine all of that? And particularly bearing in mind our audience that resource is an issue.
Sure, thanks Keith, and thanks fellow panelists. I thought all of that was highly informative with a good cross-section of varying views. and if we go back to the base, I mean, ignore the Bank of England and the enormity of the world's, we would say this, most prevalent central bank, because the facts don't differ whether we are a small SME, a micro, or indeed a macro central bank. In fact, some would argue that central bank is a little bit more difficult to deal with. But it's the people, process and technology. And what you've heard from here, no one's really talked about process, we talked a lot about people, talked a lot about technology. But what we also got to do, and this is where I think, if I go back and perhaps reference my maturing years, but that percentage figure that was quoted of 90% in 2020, in 1990, it was 80%. So it's only changed 10%. So the insider element of fraudulent activity, whether it's cyber-driven or alternatively driven, has only changed very, very small. So we really got to be conscious of that. So it comes down to our people. But I think we're going to look at the one thing that's not been talked about, I think one of our colleagues did, is the motivation. What's the motivation behind the illicit activity? You know, what's its purpose? And if I just move it to today, right? And I've said this in other readings, that if we look at the consequences of COVID-19, we're going to see unemployment, we're going to see poverty, we're going to see some difficult times. So when we look at the motivation, a lot of crime is caused by basic need, particularly if we look at some locations in other countries. Then there's the greed. People just get greedy and they commit crime because they're greedy. And then the final factor is organised or state-driven criminal activity. So if we look across our cyber spectrum, all of those three factors will occur. I think the need part will probably be less, if I'm brutally honest, in the cyber world, but the greed part will definitely. So look at the motivation. Look at the however you build a SOC, whether you have your own security operations center, whether you have a hybrid functionality, you know, the one thing we always did at the bank was not to look at what I call the daily abnormalities. I want to know the abnormal abnormalities. I don't want to know the daily glitches. That's what people are paid to deal with and look for. You want to know the abnormal abnormalities. So if you look at the abnormal abnormalities, then you look at the motivation, then you look at the purpose, then you look at the consequence, and put all these things together. Everybody's saying. The one thing no one's talked about, and we haven't got time, but partnership and sharing. Everybody's talked towards that partnership and sharing. We've got to somehow strip out the commerciality and share. Ian said about penetration testing on cloud services. Okay, but let's find a collective way of identifying any weaknesses that may occur and then put them together. I mean, every day, hundreds and hundreds of information sharing pieces of material come through. What do you do with that information? How do you interpret it? What do you build a consequence for it? So there is room out there to be sharing and understand all of that that's available to you. So in simple terms, Keith and colleagues, the maximize on what's there for you. Make sure what you're doing is appropriate. It is available. You don't have to overspend. You just have to pick the right product and appropriate processes for your particular business type, and then share with the fellows in your business industry what you're seeing. Identify, if we look at CBEST, the final thing, if we look at CBEST and threat-led intelligent penetration testing, it identifies two principal things. What are your principal businesses? What would cause you to collapse? And what are the principal technologies that support those businesses that if you were attacked could cause you to collapse? So a bit of focus around prioritization, Keith, would be my recommendation, irrespective of size of the organization, enterprise or otherwise.
Excellent. Thank you, Don. Thanks for that response. We've got 2 minutes. There are a number of questions. I think to Ian Vickers, I think we'll probably have to do another one of these sessions. I certainly would like to know more about the about data breach and the fact that the data can hit the dark web within 4 hours. I mean, that's an astonishing figure, basically, and what that means. But unfortunately, time is slipping away from us. But Deborah, if you're able to just give a little bit more insight in 1 minute, what happens in the event of a data breach, that would be very useful.
Yeah, I mean, I keep thinking you misheard what I actually said, but well, I'll put you right. What I'm saying is, with our dark search engine, we can alert people within four hours. Every 4 hours, the dark search engine refreshes. So any new data coming on will be alerted within 4 hours.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. But from a point of view of being able to get knowledge quickly that you've had a data breach, that's quicker than waiting the 100 or so days that you have to usually before you find that something's gone missing. I think that's a key thing. We're trying to cut those times down. And you know, it's amazing what's out there: bank details, credit card details, company emails. And coming back to the point that you were saying about what's the motivation for people to do these things. Certainly on the dark web, some of the motivation is as it is for us out on the open web. You know, it's trying to sell products and sell it cheaply and entice people in. Same motivation.
Okay. Well, maybe thanks for the clarification. Maybe a future session on data breaches and how to manage those and things that organizations should be aware. But I hope as an audience you've found the insights from the expert panel useful, insightful. It's given you an indication of the types of things that you should be thinking about and considering as you move into new markets and consider cloud as the scalable solution to your enterprise activities. METCloud have created a web page which has a lot of the reports and resources that have been mentioned by each of the panelists. I would urge you to click onto that site and download those reports, use it as an information resource for helping you with your fact finding and your approach to international trade. I think with that, we'll wrap up for today, and maybe we will do that session later on the dark web and what that means, and some of the other areas, particularly managing issues such as what we're facing today with the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact that's had on business. But maybe that's for another time. I'd like to say thank you to everybody for attending, and thank you our panelists for your insight. And with that, we'll close. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Keith.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks all.